And we turn next to the writer and poet Dermot Healy, who died last weekend. Seamus Heaney once called him successor to Patrick Kavanagh. And when he died, Roddy Doyle described him as possibly the best writer in Ireland. Jennifer Johnston called him a very warm man who had his moments. He was a very, very good writer. She wondered how many people read his books and hoped an enormous number of them did. Peter Fallon, who published 4 of Healy's books of poetry, said that his work was literally extraordinary.
Westmeath had its share of fame.
Dermot Healy reading from his memoir, The Bend for Home.
It was to a small business in Mullingar, capital town of the county, that Joyce dispatched Bloom's estranged daughter in a brief haunting aside in Ulysses. Joyce too succumbed to the scourge of the broken family, and it was to the same town that he had once come to sing second to John McCormick in a fesh that he sent the fictional Millie, as years later Ireland would send their unmarried mothers to Castle Pollard. He must have thought that County Westmeath had about it that sense of separation, of inwardness, of dullness even, that was necessary to portray a guilt over unfinished things. For it is the halfway house between the magic realism of the West and the bustling consciousness of the East.
Eileen Battersby, the Irish Times literary correspondent, described The Bend for Home as the best memoir by an Irish writer. The problem with the book was that it simply could not be bettered. It was Healy's absolute personal statement.
I think I was living in London when I wrote some of the book, and later maybe in Sligo. And I got that feeling when you travel across, say from Sligo to Dublin, Westmeath is nestling in the centre. Also, it was a kind of refuge. It was a kind of a memory vein that I often dwelt on and went back on over the years, but never thought I'd write about it in a memoir. It used to supply me with metaphors. But eventually I thought, well, I should stop robbing from the place and write about it as real. It is halfway between Dublin and we say the West. It is sleepy. It's by lakes. It's not some place known for huge industry. When I grew up, it was a German fishermen and English fishermen. They were the only visitors to the village.
This is from an interview with Olivia O'Leary when that memoir was published.
For me, it was a strange thing. At one stage, I nearly wanted to go back and live in it, which would have been a terrible mistake. For instance, I mightn't have written the book in the first place. I always had this because I spent the first 4 or 5 years there. And of course, to me, it was magical. It contained everything. It had all the information that was supplying me for years ahead, and I kept going back to it and back to it. And I suppose this is a later man grown up saying, oh, that's what it is, a script between the East and the West. At the time, I thought it was the centre of the world.
The magic realism of the West you talk about, and the bustling consciousness of Dublin. What do you mean?
I suppose magic realism came in with the novels that were written over in South America. There's kind of a wonder and a mystery, and so magical things happen, I suppose. A bustling consciousness is a city at work. It's straining to get up in the morning. Its buses are moving. It has places to go. While in the West, they have places to go, all right, but there seems to be a great deal of wonderful happenings going on, at least in the language and sometimes in the storytelling. And I suppose what I was just doing was stealing from both sides and putting names on it.
And maybe the magic can happen because there's a bit more time and a bit less bustle.
I think you might be right. There's also the sound of the ocean. I think that must be in what I was thinking about, that it supplies a constant background and a constant livelihood that's quite dangerous. And that stays in the mind. And I think when I was just recently reading one of Richard Murphy's poems about the tragedies off Boffin, it is quite dangerous, I would think, for people that head out in storms and are unfortunate to find that the gales come that haven't been warned about.
You grew up both in a guards barracks in Finney, a small town, and then in a bakery in Cavan, a bigger provincial town. Now, both of those places, the barracks and the bakery, in their way they were nerve centres, weren't they, of those places? The life of both towns made its way through both the guards barracks and the bakery. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, well, I remember the guards barracks as a kind of a place where you walked around the cell looking at things, and you walked around the day room looking at things, and then you walked with the father back up the village, and you might go down with him in the morning and there'd be other men, single men or married men hanging around.
Your father was a guard?
He was a guard, and they'd be dressed in various forms of blue, and I suppose then all things happened there. Things that went wrong happened there, things that went right happened there.
The occasion of this next archive interview from 1995 was the publication of what Eileen Battersby has described as one of the finest Irish novels, Dermot Healy's A Goat's Song.
Well, I think I was learning over the years how to get rid of excess. And I think at one stage I had a book which was about 700, 800 pages long, and I kept losing my way in it. And one day I remember going over to the publisher's office in London and being there and cutting it on one Monday morning from 700 pages back to the whatever it is, 420.
This is from an Arts Show interview when the book was published, an interview with Mike Murphy.
And I think I kept I was trying to balance too much. I was trying to keep too many balls in the air, and then I got rid of it, and I never read it since.
You never read it? Did you never read the finished product?
That was enough.
Did you not?
No, I read, when I have to do readings from it, I read, but I never read the book straight through to see the narrative whole, because I was frightened that it mightn't.
Mike Murphy later explored Dermot Healy's beginnings as a writer when he was still really a schoolboy.
Where were you going to school, by the way?
St Pat's College, Cavan.
And how long were you there? Was that?
I was thrown out of it in the fourth year for going to see the Bachelors. But I never went to see the Bachelors.
Bachelors, the group?
yeah, I never went to them at all.
You got thrown out of school for going to see the Bachelors?
I know, yeah, but I should have been never let back into it.
Should have been at least Big Tom. Is that right? And so you got thrown out of school at that stage.
Yes.
So what did you do then?
I went to Dundalk.
To St Mary's?
Yeah. And I spent the last year there.
Were you an unusual or an unruly or a difficult child, do you recall?
Well, I remember when in St Pat's, the time I was thrown out, I went to Dublin, and I felt I wanted to write, and went to see the man who's just died a few weeks ago. He used to run a show here in RTE.
Frank Hall,
and I went to see him up into the Evening Herald, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I went into him and said, the two English teachers in the college gave me little letters of introduction because they didn't want to see me thrown out. And they gave me, and so I brought them into him, and he says, well, I think you should do the leaving.
He said, come back.
Yeah, and then come back, yeah.
Did you ever go back to him?
No.
Why? Did you just decide,
well, then I had to go on to UCD, and I couldn't bear that either.
Did you go to UCD?
I did for a year.
And
then I left.
Why? Why did you leave that?
I couldn't stand it.
What could you not stand about it?
Well, I learned T.S. Eliot there, it was grand, but I just couldn't bear anymore being in a closed place. I wanted to read books and work. I thought it was great that England existed at the time, that you could get a job and earn money. I went over there at 16, 15 to the Isle of Man, and I thought it was great that you could actually earn. I had this thing in the back of my head that you weren't right unless you could earn money and have a wage coming in.
Had that anything to do with the fact that your dad had died when you were young and you felt a certain responsibility to do this kind of thing? Maybe it had.
Maybe it had. I never thought about that.
Did you? So you went to England though. When was this? Approximately that you went to England.
Well, it must be 68 because I remember the Troubles were just beginning in the north of Ireland, and I remember going to Paris. And you remember the Troubles were there, and they had
student riots.
Yeah. And I remember
as well.
Yeah, and I remember going through Paris, and the French TV team approached us in the underground and said, how do you like Paris? And I said, it's great. And of course they were doing a PR job, and that visitors to Paris were not affected by that. And that always comes back to me now and then to show the ignorance or the innocence of myself.
Propaganda.
No, never mind the propaganda of them.
Of yourself.
Yeah.
So what was it like in London? You were at the tail end then of the swinging 60s?
I was, yeah. Well, I remember going down to get bad soup at the end of a march for the Vietnam War, and which I hadn't marched in, but went around for the soup. I think that I was kind of politically simple and had no recourse in actual politics, and was just a hanger-on in life.
And were you writing at this stage? What were you working on the building sites, or what were you?
Yeah, I would have been, and not a very good worker on them, because I wouldn't have the strong arms of someone that had grown up on the farm. I'd be kind of weak, but I was learning it and doing as best as I could.
And were you doing any writing at this stage, or was
I would be reading poetry, because that stage was the Beatles were now coming into their hit, and there would have been the Liverpudlian poets.
Yeah, Roger McGough.
Yeah, Roger McGough, and also there was. I remember getting a room in a place down from Heathrow Airport, because I worked as a security man for a long time.
You worked as a security man?
I did, yeah, in Security Corps, yeah, and worked in Heathrow Airport.
Had you a uniform, all that?
Oh, the whole lot, business.
Yeah.
And I remember lifting out Dylan Thomas and reading them and just looking at the pages in the small little back room of an Irish woman's house. It was called Healey. I rented a room in it and just reading, just looking at the words and thinking, I want to understand them a little bit more.
To understand him.
Yeah, to understand the words.
Yeah.
To understand the words. And I remember buying with my first wages a typewriter.
And so Thomas then you liked. What other writing? Were you reading any Irish people at the time, do you recall? Like, were there
Well,
any
I would have
people-
read The Dead by James Joyce, which would have made a fierce impression, which it did on most people. You know, The Dead is
Yes.
such a careful story of jealousy. And also, it later on, you only discovered it was also a story of a feast, you know,
Yes.
a lovely party. When you read it first, because of your hunger for hurt, you only see the end. You
Yeah.
don't see the middle, which is the great gift that he had.
Yeah, so, the whole thing about hurt and all of that kind of thing. You through your life, much of your adult life, you seem to have had the problems with the booze and some emotional problems. You had a mental breakdown or something resembling a mental breakdown at one stage in your life. Isn't that right? Where did this unrest come from, or why, in other words?
Well, of course, I don't know that I had a mental breakdown because you're telling me, but I don't actually know that I had a mental breakdown or that I had. I think that always from when I was young, I was kind of the same as anybody else, except that I put it into language. And so therefore, by telling my story, I've made an impression on people who already have had their own problems, and now to see it echoed in someone's writing. And I just thought that it was time that some of these dogs be put to rest and that people open up a little bit and tell in language some of their experiences. But once you put it in language, people assume the autobiographical content.
Yes. And you didn't have a
Well, I don't think I had a
did
mental
you?
breakdown. I think I'm having one now at the moment.
Yeah.
And more of the late Dermot Healy from the archives next Sunday. But we begin with Irish writer Dermot Healy, who died just 2 weeks ago and to whom so many tributes have been paid. Poet, dramatist, novelist and editor. In last week's programme, his roots in Westmeath and Cavan, his early adult life, UCD, why he quit after 1 year, emigration to London, his first wage packet with which he bought a typewriter. This morning, Dermot Healy's approach to writing.
I live in a cottage in Sligo on a kind of a cliff which they call an alt, and it's just beside the sea. I can't open the front door at the moment because it's rusted all the way through. I can't get a key into it, and things like that make me begin to wonder. It's never the edge. I wasn't thinking it like that at all. I just loved it, the big sound of the big open air of it.
And Sligo and that dramatic seascape was also a question that Mike Murphy had in mind.
With landscape, you see, with people are inordinately fresh. They're new. They don't vacate themselves. But landscape can. Landscape can become turgid, useless, senseless, just a line on a map. And then one night the sea breaks up and you listen. Or sometimes rain falls. And I think that's a very powerful thing if you're there to hear it. Sometimes you're not there because you're inside the closed door. But if you do walk out and listen to it, I think it increases your want to give back, because the language you've been given has been given to you by thousands of people before you. When you say the word moon, you're talking about 4,000 years of moon, 3,000 years of people speaking. As we talk here, the language we've been given has been given us by countless people. And sometimes when you look at the landscape, you actually hear the unspoken words that are in your head that have been handed on to you.
In Olivia O'Leary's interview, she asked Dermot Healy about his indebtedness to his childhood as a source for his writing, and his indebtedness to each of his parents.
You wouldn't know, because at the time you don't know what you're going to remember, if you know what I mean. And now what you remember, you wonder, is it true or is it accurate?
He's talking here about the bakery which his mother ran in Cavan Town after his father had died.
I think it must have helped, but at the time I hated having to go into the house because it was a house that wasn't the same as, we'd say, what I grew up in. And then there was fair day, and there was an awful lot of washing. I abhor washing up after dinner now, since those times we had to do a few hours of it. But I'm sure it did, it supplied many voices. I can't underestimate or overestimate how much I heard backwards later through the women when they were telling their stories. How well they could mimic and remember. And I was listening to them and then got a double go of it. If I hadn't got the double go, I probably wouldn't have been able to write.
Did they have a backroom voice where they were slating people and then a sort of a public voice?
Oh yes, that
when they
went on
went
all the time, and it was hilarious. And you just nod to yourself quietly and going out the door, you know.
Your father was a guard and he died when you were quite young. What effect did that have on you?
Now when I read through the diary part of the book, I think that diary, which does exist, I think it must have been written to cover up, because there's not a moment of grief in it at all about what, and I suppose that it was kind of a rampage, somebody that went wild, because I don't know why I ended up writing it at the time. But what's strange is about 3 or 4 weeks ago I got a letter from a man, he's now in his 80s, in America, and he knew my father because his father had been a guard with him. And there's the most extraordinary few letters that come to and fro, and suddenly you see another viewpoint that you wouldn't have had, because there's very few people I knew that knew him, which say as an equal. And so I'd nearly lost them, really. But when they started remembering, it's funny how many things come back, and things you wouldn't have expected. Little walks that you took, and they're just there, and then you start tinkering with them in language, and the next thing you're visibly back in the position as you were, or you appear to be.
What sort of a man was he?
When I really knew him would be towards that end, when he had suffered from emphysema, and so I remember him fighting for his breath quite a lot and finding it very difficult to climb the steps of the church. He was very quiet. He liked to play cards, and he liked eventually to put bets on horses. It used to be called credit bets, which went on. There could be about 10 horses on it. He was a Roscommon man, resolute but deferential.
Your mother?
The mother was a very witty person and kept it up until her last days. You know, she was very funny. Actually, nowadays, I think more about her, and she enters me dreams in a way that the father doesn't. Maybe in a kind of way, because the way the book is written, the tender moments come out towards him, while a lot of the tenderness, because I cut so quickly to the end, now she haunts me in a kind of way, and I miss her quite a lot.
What do you miss?
Funny enough, that friendship and that actress, that storyteller, that sort of nearly great gentleness, you know, and but especially that ribaldness.
And did the storytelling and the ribaldness in your books come from her?
I would think it comes from them. Yeah, I think it comes from that part of the family, all right, because there were how do you describe it? The people that I'd bring to visit, their eyes would go back in their head with what was coming out, and oh yeah, I owed them a lot. Yeah.
For a writer with such an established reputation, his output was not prolific. Mike Murphy reminded him of this point.
Do you consider that your output, what age are you now? About 40?
48, I would consider it very poor.
Your output has been very, you've had a low output, haven't you? For your years and for your talent and for the interest that you have in writing. So why is that? Why haven't you?
I'm just slow. I mean, 3 or 4 plays, a few books. I'm just slow. I can't do anything about that. I think I wanted to live with the work I had. I wanted to be able to live with it myself, and I would probably cut out more and more and more that I do. I mean, yesterday's work is today's. It's gone. I cut it out, and so maybe an hour today will finish 7 hours yesterday. I'll get rid of it. I just have that, and I can't do nothing about it.
Do you wish you could?
Well, I wouldn't wish. No, I wouldn't wish I could. No.
So what about? I know you didn't read the full A Goat Song, edited down from your original, but do you feel pleased that it turned out as you would have wished when you sat down?
Yes, I do.
Do you?
Yes.
And are you pleased that it got the critical reaction first of all, but I gather it's commercially successful also? Are you pleased with the critical reaction to it first?
No, I'm pleased that it's finished and it was out. I don't think about it all that much.
No.
And what's very nice is that for the first time in life you get letters through the post from people, and that's a new phenomenon, for me. People write to you out of the blue. You'll be well used to it because you're in a. But this is totally different, and people write to you intimate letters, and I do read them and put them away, and then I never answer them. And then there a couple of weeks ago I thought, why didn't I answer them?
Yeah.
Why didn't I?
And why didn't you?
It still was an illusion to me. The book is still an illusion.
Yeah.
It's something out there. And the next book is the one that I'm working on, and I just didn't take it serious.
And on the question of how he approaches writing, how he composes, how he writes, his working day, Olivia O'Leary asked him about this.
When you write, Do you write once and move on, or do you go over the text again and again?
In the early days, I went over it and over it and over it. I think now when I get close to it, I don't do as much as I used to. In them days, you'd work all day and complete 10 pages and then work it down and fiddle with it till it was 2. But now I don't have the time to do the exercise. So I take me time longer now, and I'll edit away all right, but I'll be editing mentally. What I'll put down on the page sometimes will be about the height of it. While in the older days, I put down plenty of stuff and then edit back. Now I try to edit slowly onto the page, so what I'm getting down has gone through the mechanism. But then when I get to the end, if it's going to be a novel, there's going to be a fierce amount of changes, maybe along the way, and then some at the end. But generally, it's like the last book now. It was hard to keep going. It was hard to keep the speech pattern, to continue with that all the way along. And that self-edits. If you have a voice, it corrects you. You can't let yourself in, and you have to leave out. There's a whole lot of things it pushes out of the way. And so I was lucky in that sense. Now, what will happen the next time around, I don't know. But I'm sure editing is part of the process, because it's editing that makes the illusion work.
And when you are starting a piece of work, have you already sketched out a plan, or do you start and see where it takes you?
I see where it takes me. I like that particular thing of being organic, that I don't know what's going to happen, and then entering into it. But you have to be very careful after the process, because it could take you any place, and that could be a lost week or a lost month. What I do is try to work as far as I can to push myself beyond my own conceits. What's probable, what's not probable. To get beyond that, so that I take chances. Writers are very conservative, and deeply conservative, and the chances that they take nearly breaks them down. So you have to push yourself, because otherwise you'd rely on formulaic, or maybe rely on the easy way out. Because there is this sort of thing, and I think that's where the demons come from. Will anyone read this? Will anyone believe this? And then at that stage you may try to make it more believable, and at that stage what you're doing is the wrong thing. And that's in you. That's in everybody. And so what you're trying to do is battle between this conservative being that wants to make everything comfortable or uncomfortable, depending on just what's wanted. And then there's the other person that says, push it further. And I think that gets a bit harder each time. And
which voice do you prefer? The one that says push it further?
Well, that's there, but I think the two of them are there. The two of them are in conflict all the time. And there's a lazy voice, that won't go out and do anything. And then there's a trier. And one day you might have the lazy voice will dominate.
And here's how Dermot Healy's interview with Mike Murphy concluded. Remember, it was in 1995, just after the publication of A Goat's Story.
What are you doing at the moment? What are you working on?
I'm working on a book called The Bend for Home, which is a kind of memoir on the mother and father and growing up in Finney and living in Cavan. And it charts like the early days, and then it moves into the mother's death in Cootehill, which was...
When did your mother die? Only a few years ago.
A couple of years ago,
right?
Yeah. She was 89, I think, 88.
Right. She was a big influence on you, wasn't she?
Oh, yeah. They were storytellers through and through. There's one of them alive. There's two, Uncle Seamus and Auntie Nancy. But they taught me storytelling.
Dermot Healy from the archives, and based on 2 interviews, one with Olivia O'Leary and an earlier interview on the Arts Show with Mike Murphy.